conversely go talk to my AAG and say, here's the information that I have, here's the people that it pertains to, those kind of things. I'm bound by statute as to what I can and cannot release, and as long as we can get this to comport with that statute, we're good to go, and we're not that far off.
And Brian, so is law enforcement from our side of things with them and anybody else, same kind of scenario. I think going back to the process, from my understanding, Dan, is any local law enforcement agency or state agency will have video access to this thing through probably an account, and that account will be either identifiable through an email address or an Active Directory type of scenario. Is that correct? So we could actually have, if we need to, have an audit process or know who's going to be accessing this video at any one time, I would assume, right? So maybe to address some of those concerns that Ryan brought.
Well, I think that's heading in the right direction. And part of my concern is, what is provided by law. Like, I think that the difference I see between these two drafts is sort of provided by law. I think you guys can potentially do a lot of things. But what I'm looking for is when you can share information when it's required, as opposed to provided. And that's what I sort of try to draft this rule around. Maybe that's worth kind of continuing to ponder and we address that next time. But and maybe your assertion is that provided by law, well, we're very strict in this. That has not, like things like this Second Amendment case that is going on. I mean, it's not really been my experience as of late. This is sort of getting whittled down. I just want to make sure we're not pushing something through that is really giving up the confidentiality that we've had for the last 10 years and allows, allows government entities to freely share information if they're provided to, if they're able to, but not, I think it should be only when they're required to. When there is a serious ongoing criminal investigation, they're required to, not just freely sharing information.
But that's the problem, is that Matt Cook is not required to call the Denver Police or the Attorney General. There's not a mandatory reporting requirement. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but as opposed to like a doctor who sees domestic violence, they are required to. It's a mandatory reporting situation. No such language exists in this format, in this area. So that's why the difference between able to and required to it's very significant. Because if it was required, then there would be no ability to share it.
No, you're right, yeah. But we're not far off, Brian. And I would like to spend some time with you to see if we can't wordsmith what you've got here and maybe find something. If you've got some time in the next 30 or 2. Yeah. All right, I think it is.
Is there a way, though, to distinguish between investigations that are related to a center and the patient's identity? Is there a way to strip the patient's identity from that information being shared? If the patient's activity is not the subject activity going on in the dispensary, then every effort should be made to make that, to protect the anonymity and privacy of the patient that's inadvertently part of an investigation that isn't centered on them, as opposed to someone that's going in from dispensary to dispensary, buying 2 ounces 4 times a day for weeks. I mean, that person would be the target, as opposed to a center that may be selling to people that don't have licenses. That there should be something in this draft that automatically protects the patient information that isn't relevant to what the criminal activity is being perceived at.
I think you're saying the same thing as what Matt Durkin responded to. And I mean, I'm sensitive to the issue, but I'm not going to handcuff law enforcement and our ability to communicate with them. I just won't do that. That's part of that regulatory function. But can I take that personal identifying information and use it for personal gain or disclose it to other non-authorized persons outside the realm of official business? Absolutely not. I have sanctions for that.
No, but that's not even the case. If you may have 20 patients that are videotaped as part of an investigation of the center, and if the criminal activity is based on what is happening on the center's side of it and not what the patient is doing, then that patient should be protected, their identity should be protected through that investigation. But the patient information should not be what's shared with other agencies Am I saying this right?
I get what
Yes.
you're saying.
Yeah, you should know
Very
what
much.
you said.
If you as a center are
Matt was next.
Well, I'll defer to Barb. Go for it.
Go ahead.
You sure?
yeah.
Always, anytime. I understand what you're saying, but it's somewhat short-sighted. And the reason being is that perhaps those 20 patients that you're referring to are the witnesses of the criminal violation of the medical marijuana center. You see what I'm saying? So to put in any type of language that you're suggesting there is doing exactly what Mr. Cook is saying, and that is hamstringing law enforcement, which quite frankly has no authority. None of us here have the authority to do anyway. But do you see what I'm saying? It's not as, investigations aren't as cut and dried as perhaps you're suggesting. We wish they were, but they're not. For instance, even if your target was a patient, perhaps other patients are witnesses to that target. So, I think law enforcement is, and perhaps others in the room would disagree, my experience with law enforcement is they are pretty sensitive to the confidentiality of medical marijuana patients. They redact the heck out of documents all the time from a police agency perspective, and we certainly tried to do that in the district attorney's office when we released the discovery. This has, in my experience, this has the same level of protection as juvenile witnesses and victims of crimes in practice in the field. Now, of course, I don't know what other people's experiences are. For instance, Brian had a negative experience recently on an isolated case. But I think the protections, or at least the sensitivity to these confidentiality issues are already there. Now, I understand y'all want more guarantee than that, and I certainly respect that, but you also have to kind of look at the other side of the equation.
We have a particular case here, and it's how do we avoid the situation that Brian described, where the information is floating around, and either the sheriff or a local DA has leverage, right, uses this information really unethically.
There's a law to protect that. I mean,
What would happen to that?
It's still pending at 30 days.
I mean, I guess the flip side of that is it's writing something in the rule or reg wouldn't have prevented that situation from happening. I mean, there may still be some bad actors along the way, but as long as there's a way to deal with them in law, then I feel pretty.
That's all we're asking.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I'll give you an example. It's somewhat embarrassing, but it happened, and that was we had a DOR employee that embezzled about $11 million not so long ago. They're in jail. For a very, very, very long time,
And this
It's a fraud, it's not
This is
a
an assumption, it could be a mistake. I mean, I don't know anything about that case that you mentioned, Brian, but, you gotta show the intent, to do something that's harmful to the patient. But at the same time, it could have been some type of mistake too, so I don't know.
Yeah. And again, I don't think we're that far off, so I would enjoy an opportunity to meet with Justice.
I think we need to take into account that the harms done to somebody, especially a patient who may be impacted by a violation of their privacy, are often very costly, and hiring an attorney like Brian to go in and restore your right to have your gun is really costly, as opposed to protecting your rights right from the get-go is free. And so I think we have the opportunity right here to do a really good job of making this a little bit safer and not leaving somebody like Brian's client open to the possibility of what occurred. And I think that, I like what he did, but I'd like to see it cover intellectual property too, because while it's, not an individual thing, it's, if any other business was bringing as many jobs into the state as we are, their intellectual property would be protected by the new governor extremely thoroughly. So I think we need to take into account that we are providing a lot of jobs, and they are based on us being an excellent business state that provides the opportunity to protect this intellectual property.
One last one, and then we'll move it on. Ed?
Can you clarify one thing? Does all requests for access to the surveillance system in place have to go through you?
Yes.
So in other words, somebody in Boulder County Sheriff's Office can't just access a dispensary, a center in?
No, the way that, let me rephrase rephrase my answer. It's going to go through us at the state level, or state investigators, all of that in connection with the issuance of the license, you're going to do it. There's a local license in connection with this as well. Some venues are gonna want the ability to have that, and it'll be a condition of issuance of that local license, that they have access to it. Will that be uniform throughout the state? Probably not.
But a local licensing authority in Boulder won't be able to see what a Denver licensee is
No,
doing.
no, not at all. So there will have to be a system in place for Boulder to look at the Boulder the Boulder centers or grow-ups.
It could be the state system.
Literally log on.
Well, it's the same
Email,
system.
Same system, yeah.
They're gonna ask for your IP address, your username, and your password. They could sit right out front of your place, and they have technology.
They can't get work from
They could watch your video right in front of their,
Yeah.
right in front.
Absolutely.
And police cars are equipped with that kind of technology. That's what we do.
And also the flip side that we saw in Colorado Springs a little bit ago, that there was a break-in in the middle of the night.
Right.
And, you know, that use of cameras was able, you know, enabled the people to make a very prompt call to the police department, and the perpetrators were arrested, so it works both ways.
Okay, we're gonna move on here. I think we kind of know where we're going with that.